Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Hey Doc, What's New in Plant-Based Medicine? Today, I'm excited. I say that every week, but I'm excited with all my guests, but I'm especially excited to have Dr. Steven Lawenda, a board-certified family medicine physician at Kaiser Permanente in Southern California, and he is spearheading an amazing program throughout the Kaiser system, starting with his own medical center. Welcome, Dr. Lawenda. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so honored to be here. I'm doing well, thanks.
So my first question is always, hey, Doc, what's new in plant-based medicine?
Well, that's such a great question, Lisa. And I had no idea you'd ask that. No, just kidding. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't answer that question this way. There has been tremendous writing on the wall for years, and we have not done a good job of recognizing this writing on the wall. And unfortunately, this writing on the wall is becoming more and more bold year after year, but especially this year, to the point that it's actually, I would say it's no longer writing on the wall. It's more like graffiti, perhaps even worse. I don't know what could be worse than graffiti, and the writing's not only on the wall, it's even in the skies. Our skies are dark, they're brown, they're gray, they're orange. There's messages in what's happening in our world, and we're not seeing how everything, not necessarily everything, but how so much of our current crises are related to food, and how plant-based nutrition is the best answer at mitigating so many of the modern crises of our time. And I have a question for the audience, actually. And this is the theme of what I'd like to talk about today, but I have a question for the audience. Have you or a loved one struggled with, worried about, or experienced any of the following? I have a feeling you're going to answer yes to many of these, but I just want to have you all take a moment to reflect on these for a moment. Have you struggled with weight or a loved one, chronic disease such as diabetes, heart disease, cancer? Perhaps a loved one may have died too young, perhaps these run in the family. Have you been worried about or stressed about in any way, affected in any way by the high cost of medical care? Have you had trouble either getting in to see your doctor, or perhaps you've had an experience where you've been to your doctor and your doctor seems rushed, maybe doesn't have enough time to spend with you, doesn't perhaps do the best job of listening to you because for whatever reason? Have you been worried about or stressed or affected in any way by COVID? I think just about all of us have. Have you been worried about or affected in any way? And I believe all of us have to an extent, about the racial health disparities, when it comes to so many chronic diseases, which have been, we've all been made more aware of this year, but years in the past as well. And have you been affected, especially those of us on the West Coast, by these horrible, awful fires that are the worst in history? I think many of us will answer yes to several of those questions. And as I was mentioning earlier, the theme of what I'd like to focus on today is how, a lot of times in life, we tend to compartmentalize problems. We say, well, there's obesity, there's climate change, there's high cost of medical care. There's all these separate issues. But what I'd like to focus on today is that there's a common thread, Lisa. There's a common thread to all of these issues, and that is food or nutrition. And plant-based nutrition is the most powerful thing that we can do as a society as far as moving in this direction to mitigate or reverse so many of these crises. I'm not gonna sit here and say that we're gonna cure everything, cure every disease. The world is gonna be butterflies and rainbows all the time. But moving in the direction of plant-based medicine can have tremendous benefits across so much of what ails our society. So I know that's a long answer, but I'm so passionate about this. And I really think that this year, the crises of this year, 2020, as bad as this year has been, I think we need to take a step back, take a deep breath, and reflect on underlying causes of what's happening around us this year. And not only this year, but even in years past. I do have a few slides I've prepared, and I'd like to actually, if it's okay, take a moment to discuss the worst pandemic ever. And the interesting thing is, I'm going to surprise you all, because you're probably thinking I'm going to mention COVID, that the worst pandemic is COVID. But actually, technically speaking, the experts say that COVID is perhaps the worst infectious disease pandemic in the last 100 years. But it's not, in terms of lives lost, and we'll get to this in a moment, it's not the most deadly pandemic in the last 100 years. The most deadly pandemic is the obesity and chronic disease pandemic. We haven't been paying enough attention to this pandemic. And again, I think the problem is that, don't go too far yet, Lisa, but I appreciate what you're doing. I think the most important thing is that we refer to these chronic diseases in isolation as if they have nothing to do with each other. But actually, 75% of chronic diseases, the diseases that are killing, and you'll see the numbers here in a moment, of so many Americans, much more than COVID, are lifestyle related. And the number one factor in the number one lifestyle factor that contributes, you'll see, is food. We'll get to that in a moment. So if you could bring up the slides again, please, Lisa. And so the number of people dying per year, not of COVID, but of obesity and chronic diseases is 1.8 million Americans every year. 1.8 million, nearly 2 million, and that's 5,000 per day. Now, where did I get this number? I made this up, didn't I? No, I didn't make this up. These are official statistics from the CDC. You can get them from their website. The link is actually there. And if you add up all chronic disease deaths, you will come to roughly 1.8 million. And again, these appear to be all separate diseases: heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, kidney disease, on and on and on. But 75% of them, not of them, but 75% of the deaths are preventable. And that's what's most important.
And let's talk about the comparison between the number of COVID-related deaths this year. I believe it's about 190,000. And according to the CDC data, it's 1.8 million deaths per year from various chronic diseases, and you've listed them here from the CDC website. Let's go through them. Heart disease, 647,457. Next, not that far behind it, are cancer-related deaths, then accidents. I'm reading this because it may be too small for some people to see.
Sure.
Chronic lower respiratory diseases at 160,000, strokes at 146,000, Alzheimer's at 121,000, diabetes at 83,000. And then it goes down: influenza and pneumonia. Now we're not talking about COVID, 55,000, nephritis and nephrotic syndrome, kidney problems, 50,000, and intentional self-harm suicide at 47,000.
Right.
So when we look at 1.8 million deaths that most likely, you're saying, your thesis is they can be prevented or reversed compared to the COVID deaths.
Right. And you know what's interesting too, and we'll get to this a little bit later in my slides, is that the 1.8 million is excluding infectious diseases. But actually what we've learned, especially this year, I mean, we've known this to an extent in years past, but especially this year, is how chronic diseases are intricately linked to, or I should say, associated with much higher risk of dying from infectious diseases. So they're not actually separate. I mean, they are in many ways, but in other words, if we didn't have such a chronic disease burden in this country, we wouldn't have so many infectious disease deaths as well. So we can make the case that so many of these infectious disease deaths are actually complications of chronic diseases. And I have some statistics on that, which I'll share a little bit later. So if you don't mind pulling up my slides again, Lisa. So this pandemic, the obesity and chronic disease pandemic, unfortunately, again, the writing's been on the wall. What you see on top and bottom are, thank you. These are obesity rates in the United States. The darker, I know it may be hard to see the small numbers there, but basically the darker the colors, the increased rates in the country. And you can see that actually, to be honest with you, over the last 30 years or so, the rates of obesity, which is on the top, and diabetes, which is on the bottom, have tripled over the last 30 years. Tripled. We're not talking 10%, 30%, we're talking 300% increase over the last 30 years. Again, the writing's been on the wall for many, many, many years. The obesity rate in this country is approaching 50%. That means that within the next few years, if nothing changes, literally half of the United States will be technically obese. And pre-diabetes and diabetes, when you combine the two, is already past 50%. So half of the country, half of the adults And by the way, we're seeing this a lot in younger and younger people and children now, but half the adults in this country are at risk of diabetes or they have it already. I mean, this is a crisis that we can no longer ignore in this country. So if we can go to the next slide, and feel free to interrupt, and if we can.
Well, what I wanted to ask, I'll ask a question. Let's talk about life expectancy.
Okay, sure. And so this is the other thing too, is that over the last 100 years, for the most part, we've made dramatic improvements in life expectancy. But because of the obesity and chronic disease pandemic, and because we haven't seen the writing on the wall or acted on the writing on the wall for many years, we're now seeing there's been studies showing that have predicted that life expectancy for today's children is going to be shorter than that of their parents. And this is very concerning. This is a paper that was published a few years ago in New England Journal of Medicine. And what they concluded was, unless effective population level interventions to reduce obesity are developed, the steady rise in life expectancy observed in the modern era may soon come to an end, and the young today may, on average, live less healthy and possibly even shorter lives than their parents. And it's interesting because a lot of times we focus on numbers, we focus on life expectancy, which we are for the moment, but it's more than just years of life. It's life to years, it's quality of life. And chronic diseases not only impact your lifespan, they also impact dramatically, in many cases, your quality of life. And not only that, but your ability to work, and how, the whole family can be affected when a loved one is afflicted with a serious chronic disease. I mean, we all have stories. I'm sure we all can relate to this. I'm sure we all have family members who've gone through experiences like this, and I sure have in my family. I could tell you lots of stories about that, but I want to stay on topic for now. The other thing, Lisa, is it's not only the burden of lives lost and of quality of life, but it's also the cost. And I do have a slide on that as well, if you don't mind pulling that up. This is crazy. If you look at this, this goes back from 1970 to about 2015 or so, maybe 2017, I think, is when they cut it off. And what's so scary and so awful about this is you can see that there's been, even when they adjusted for inflation, the blue line is adjusted for inflation, the green line is not. But even when we adjust for inflation, the cost of healthcare in this country has gone up about 8 to 9 times over the last 40 years or so, or 40 to 50 years, 8 to 9 times. This is just simply unsustainable. And you might think, well, but how does that affect me? Well, there was another study, and I think the next slide shows this, Lisa, too, is that this is last year, 2019. I would imagine that in this year, it's probably worse because of what's happening with COVID and how it's affecting the economy, et cetera, et cetera. Half of the adults in this country reported that they could not afford healthcare, to the extent they had to actually postpone seeking care or delay it. I mean, half of the country is not able to get, it's not because they don't have insurance. I mean, many people have insurance, that's a whole nother story. But half of the adults in this country simply are delaying care. I mean, or foregoing, and this is a crisis we can simply not ignore. I mean, no matter how good our healthcare is, if you can't access it because you can't afford it, I mean, what good is that? So we have so many crises going on right now on so many levels, from so many angles, and they're all related. And they're all severe in their own right. They're all critical for us to look at. But there's one more, actually, and this is all, by the way, this is before COVID even came. All these issues have been going on for years, but there's another one. And the other one is burnout in the medical profession. And you might think, and I'll just share, let me talk about the statistics a little bit. More than half of primary care doctors are reporting significant symptoms of burnout in this country. Less than 30% of primary care doctors say that they would choose their specialty again. There's a shortage of primary care doctors, and it's anticipated for it to worsen over the years. And you might think, well, how does this affect me, as a patient? Well, you know what? It does affect you as a patient, because let me back up for a moment, and let me back up even further. How does this relate to obesity and chronic disease? Because the theme here is the common thread that really relates, that ties all these issues together. And how does this relate to obesity and chronic disease? Well, I'll tell you what. as the population has become more obese and as they have developed increasing numbers of chronic diseases, they are increasingly more complex and time consuming to take care of. And most primary care doctors chose this profession because they love medicine and they love people. They love helping people. They love taking care of people. However, in any job, when the work becomes harder, we all feel like we need more time and more resources to help us. The thing is that the time that we've been given as primary care doctors, the resources has been, for the most part, limited over the years. It's been stagnant. But the burden of chronic disease and obesity has increased dramatically. So we're working harder and not necessarily having the extra time that we need. And the other thing too is that I think most people would agree that when you're working hard, especially when you're working harder, you want to see the results. And the thing is, I think a lot of primary care doctors are frustrated or disenchanted because they're not seeing their patients get well. Pills help mitigate, maybe improve numbers. They improve your blood pressure, they improve your cholesterol, they improve your blood sugars, but patients aren't truly getting well. Now with lifestyle, they are. That's why, again, lifestyle is the theme and nutrition is the theme, the common thread that ties all these together. But burnout is a crisis we cannot ignore as a country, because if we don't have doctors, what do we have? And if the doctors are stressed or they're rushed for time, for whatever it may, for all these reasons mentioned, it's a huge problem for all of us. So again, there's so many crises when it relates to health in this country. We've talked. If you look at conversations that doctors are having around burnout, they're not addressing the obesity and chronic disease pandemic. They're not looking at the common thread. When there's discussions about cancer, for the most part, they they leave out lifestyle. And there's discussions about the crisis, the cost crisis, how expensive healthcare is. What typically comes up is politics, healthcare reform, insurance reform, and things like that. But what about lifestyle? What about nutrition? What about more plants? What about food policy?
And this plays such an important part. And what I'm so glad that you're explaining to our audience, that from the position of the psyche of the physician, to be doing something where you're just managing your patients. You've got them on 2 blood pressure medications. It's not controlling their blood pressure. Now you're going to add a third. And you've got a patient who's not controlling their blood sugar. You may need to add insulin, even to a type 2 diabetic. These things if you get more and more drugs, because people are making themselves increasingly sicker from their lifestyle choices.
That's right.
So that's why it's very hard to go to work every day and feel like I did nothing. I didn't help anybody, and now they're angry with me because I've given them more drugs and more copays and more expense and more side effects.
Absolutely.
And it isn't fun anymore.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is that what happens, you're absolutely right, Lisa. What happens a lot of times with and I've seen this with so many patients, is that if you have a patient, for example, who's obese, who has many chronic diseases, and you start, as you mentioned, we start prescribing more and more medication. To some extent, again, the numbers will come down and the disease process will probably slow down, but it won't reverse. So things will continue to get worse. They may get worse at a slower pace, but they'll most likely continue to get worse. And inevitably what happens is patients, not only do they get sicker and sicker, but a lot of times anxiety will set in, frustration, even depression will set in. There's a high correlation between depression and chronic disease. They may start to have financial problems because they can't afford their care. They may start to have problems at work because they can no longer work. Maybe they're disabled. There's a strong correlation between disability and chronic disease. So it goes on and on. It's like a fire, no pun intended, that just keeps spreading and spreading. And it's affecting all of us. And I think it's affecting the morale of our country. I mean, yes, it's morale of individuals, but as a society, it just has such huge impacts. And so, yes, absolutely. There is a better way, and there is a thread, there is writing on the wall that we have ignored. And that's the theme of what we're talking about today. And, this has all been happening before COVID. This is the thing, Lisa, is that what frustrates me is this has all been happening before COVID. We haven't done enough. And this year, the crises that have occurred, if anything, are the boldest reminders we could possibly imagine that we need to be taking a step back and looking at the writing on the wall that's been there. And so I was just going to talk about COVID a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
I believe this is COVID. At least it's a virus. When COVID first hit, obviously it's been a very anxious time for our country. They refer to it as, of course, as an infectious disease pandemic. They referred to it, they meaning the scientists, the doctors, and they said that it's the worst pandemic in the last 100 years. Well, we talked about how it's not, but also what became clear early on was that 90% of people who are dying of COVID-19 are people with chronic conditions. The very same obesity and chronic conditions, the very same chronic conditions that we just referred to, that are killing 1.8 million Americans a year. So these are not new chronic conditions. These are the very same ones. Asthma, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, and on, and heart disease as well. So high blood pressure is hypertension, of course. But the point is that yes, COVID is new. Yes, it is something that is going to require specific treatments. But if 90% of people who are dying of it are people with chronic conditions, why aren't we looking at that enough? We need to be looking at that more. This needs to be a moment in our society, in our world, where we look in the mirror and we do all that we can to reflect on how we got here and how we can get out of it. Obviously, if we were to optimize our lifestyle, we're not going to prevent all deaths. We're not going to prevent all COVID deaths. There still is going to be a COVID pandemic. But if you can imagine, if we could somehow prevent 70, 80, 90% of COVID-19 deaths because we all are living a much healthier lifestyle, I mean, that would be absolutely tremendous.
It's about changing. It's about changing our habits, and I think that's the issue. It's a disconnect because people, even the systems, aren't talking to each other. The pharmaceutical industry is interested in new drugs. Physicians are interested in their patients getting better. Patients don't want to hear they have to give up some of their favorite foods. They'd rather die. But the truth of the matter is, when they are dying, they say, "I should have given it up." Because would you rather have your hot dog and have cancer, or be able to play with your grandchildren or your children, or participate with your family?
You're absolutely right.
We know that without question, upon review of 800 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles, the United Nations determined that processed meat is a class 1 carcinogen, on the same level as asbestos and other cancer-causing components. But we eat hot dogs and we eat pepperoni pizza and we feed it to our children. These are things we have to change. Can you address something?
No, absolutely. I think
why we can't get rid of these. We don't smoke anymore. Now we need to stop eating processed meat and perhaps a lot of other foods as well.
You're absolutely right. I think a lot of this, goes back to, obviously food and smoking are very different. But I think what we need to realize, and I have actually a slide, you don't have to bring it up right now because we'll get to it, but if we, we'll get to it eventually, but is that people need to realize that even though smoking and food are different, today food kills more people than cigarettes do. And people need to realize that. I think the average person probably has no idea that that's the case, but that has been studied. And that is the scientific consensus now, is that food kills more Americans than cigarettes. Mm-hmm. And, speaking of cigarettes, there was a time not long ago, 50, 60 years ago, where cigarette smoking was very common. About half the population smoked. And it was not only considered okay, it was actually considered cool. And I think the problem, so now if you fast forward to today, it's no longer considered cool. It's considered gross. It's considered very unhealthy. It's our perception, the culture around smoking has completely changed, and we have to get there with food. And it's going to take, obviously we haven't gotten to it. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it's not just individual effort. I think collectively as a society and culture, we have to get there. But on the individual level, what people need to realize, and this is something I needed to realize, I'll share my personal story a little bit later in the conversation, but is that we get kind of hooked or addicted to certain, especially processed foods. And there's a reason we do. I mean, these foods are designed really to get us hooked, because if, the companies are in this for money, and the more hooked they get us, the more money they make. So there's a financial incentive. But then also, again, hot dogs are part of American culture, and cigarettes used to be. So there's many layers to this. But what people need to realize is that when you give up certain foods or certain types of foods, like refined sugar, like processed meat, whatever it may be, in the beginning, you might be kind of grumpy, to be honest. Just like giving up cigarettes, you will be grumpy, you will be irritable. But the thing is that if you only focus on the first few days of how you feel after giving something up like that, you will never overcome that so-called addiction. So if, for example, if a smoker just decided one day to quit, and they felt awful, they felt grumpy and irritable because they're going through withdrawal, they're most likely not going to quit. In other words, in order to quit, you need to understand that you will be grumpy or irritable for a few days, or maybe even a few weeks, maybe even a month or so. But over time, you can adjust. Your taste buds change, your brain changes, withdrawal goes away. So I noticed through my own journey that when it came to food, the foods that I loved, when I first sort of gave them up, and by the way, giving them up that's probably not even the right way to explain it. It's just, in some cases, it's making your favorite foods. You're still eating perhaps your favorite foods, but you're making them healthier. You're using healthier ingredients. You're preparing them differently. So you don't necessarily have to give up your favorite foods. For example, not to be too funny here, but there is such a thing as a carrot dog. I don't know if I'm sure, Lisa, you've tried a carrot dog. But so the point, there's many ways of substance, and those are delicious, by the way. They really are. But the point is that you don't really have to give up anything when it comes with cigarettes. You really have to give up cigarettes. But when it comes to food, you're not giving up food. You're just eating the food in a much healthier way. And the thing is, your taste buds will change, and you'll enjoy it. I enjoy my food. I enjoy my food today, and I became plant-based about a little over 7 years ago. I enjoy my food just as much, maybe even more than I ever did. And actually, I do enjoy it more because my food is not just pleasure now, but there's a spiritual meaning behind my food, because I know that I'm feeding my body, I'm feeding my health, I'm having less anxiety about my food because I just have less guilt, and I know I feel better physically. And I feel better about my future and my family. I know that I'm going to be around longer for our children. So my food has taken on such more meaning now. So there's so many layers to this. You're absolutely right, Lisa. We have to just look in the mirror, and we need a huge culture shift in this country. With and I emphasize culture shift because if you're an individual watching this, yes, you should work on your diet. And lifestyle. The thing is that we don't live in vacuums. We're social creatures. There's a very strong, very powerful influence of our social network when it comes to food and obesity. I don't know if you may or may not have heard of this study, Lisa. There was a study years ago where, and this is kind of shocking. We always think about our genetics being the most important thing when it comes to obesity and chronic disease. But if you have a friend who's obese, that increases your risk of being obese significantly more than if it's your own sibling, a friend. Now, and the other thing which is fascinating too is that if you have a friend of a friend of a friend who's obese, that's 3 degrees of separation, if I got that right. That according to this study, that also increases your risk of being obese. So it's our social network. And when we're making changes to our lifestyle, it really helps to have the support around us, because when, especially, like, for example, we have a lot of data on smoking cessation, that when people are trying to quit, if they have family members around them who are supportive, who are encouraging them, they're much more likely to succeed. Exactly. And we have data. There was actually a study on social media, the influence. Believe it or not, I know we're on Facebook right now and other social media sites, but there was a study that looked at people's social media friends and their perception of our perception of how our social media friends ate. And it turns out that our perception of how they ate seems to be associated with how we eat. So there's just such a strong social and cultural connection with food, and we can't ignore that. I think that's one of the problems why we're not moving the needle forward as much, is that we're not looking at this more globally, more culturally. The politicians aren't talking about it enough. And there's financial incentives. To be honest with you, there's financial incentives behind the status quo.
Right.
Exactly. You know, there's a lot of money being made off of chronic disease, unfortunately. Pharmaceutical procedures, surgeries, hospitals.
And the USDA. I mean, we're working very hard to get dairy removed from the dietary guidelines. And it's just become a cultural phenomenon, but it doesn't have any basis in science. In fact, it makes us sicker. You know, when you were talking about having friends, and I am familiar with that study, but what's also interesting is people say, oh, you know, this runs in my family. Right. And probably whatever we're talking about that runs in your family, if it's obesity, if it's diabetes, if it's heart disease, it's that families tend to eat similarly.
Right.
So if everybody has those similar poor eating choices, we always fry all these things and prepare certain traditional dishes that we feel that we have to have, then we're all going to suffer.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to.
Absolutely.
We can make those changes. So,
and you know, the other thing, you're absolutely right, Lisa. And the other thing too is that a lot of people feel like, oh, I don't want to give up grandma's recipe, or I don't want to, or, you know, there's a certain pride and in families with respect to recipes and food and passing down recipes and so forth and so on. And what I would say, and I think a lot of people probably already know this, but, you know, if this offends grandma, God forbid, but we don't want grandma to die either. A lot of grandmas suffer with chronic diseases too. I know mine did to an extent, but the thing is we can make modifications to grandma's recipe that still preserve the essence of the food, the spice, the flavor, and we can still honor grandma, but just make some slight modifications. So
I made chicken soup with matzo balls.
There you go.
It was chicken, and the matzo balls aren't held together with eggs; they're held together with egg replacer. And let me tell you, by the time I add the seasonings, people wonder, I thought you were vegan.
Right. You know, I want to just go back, Lisa, to
we were going to talk
this whole idea. If you could bring up my slides again. This whole idea that chronic disease and infectious disease are very much strongly related, strongly correlated. A lot of times when, let's see, where were we? Can you go back a slide? I forgot where we were. I see what you, oh yeah, this one actually, if you could leave it here. I didn't realize this as a primary care doctor. I knew that this was a problem to an extent. But, you know, we talk about how 90% of COVID deaths are in people with chronic diseases, obesity and chronic disease. But we see basically the same statistics with flu. If you can go to the next slide, please, Lisa. About 90% or more of people hospitalized because of flu have obesity or a chronic disease. And the most common are heart disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and obesity when it comes to flu. The other thing that we've learned about flu is that people who are obese are more likely to shed the virus for a longer period of time. So they're more likely to spread it. So obesity and chronic disease, in a way, are almost like gasoline to a fire. They're not only intensifying the problem, the death rate. They're intensifying the death rate, but they're also intensifying the spread. And so we need to look at, with the flu season's coming up, there's a lot of attention to flu vaccine. Everybody get, your flu shot, et cetera, et cetera. But where is the conversation around lifestyle? If over 90% of people who are afflicted severely by flu are afflicted because they're obese or have a chronic disease, where is the attention to that? And again, we just simply can't ignore this. It's the common thread. So,
and this, I think what's interesting is this came from the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report of June 2019, and also the Journal of Infectious Diseases in 2018. So you're not just pulling this out of a hat. No, this actually comes from peer-reviewed journals that are very well respected in terms of how these viral diseases are spread. Right.
And all the statistics I'm sharing today, all the statements I'm making, I mean, they're all backed up from journals, from science, and I have the references on all the slides. So absolutely, Lisa, I don't even think I could have made this all up. Honestly, I had no idea. I think when you learn the truth, it can be shocking, and if it is shocking, we need to do something about it. And we're not doing enough. So, I think we need to all be more aware of what the truth is. And I'm so glad, Lisa, I'm so honored, and I'm so glad that you're allowing us to share this with everyone, and I'm just honored to be a part of it. So thanks, Lisa.
Well, this is just, I mean, I'm honored to have all these incredible guests every week that you take out time. This is a weekday. This is your work week. And to take out this much time, plus all the time it took you to put together these presentations. This is not something you put together in 10 minutes. So I really appreciate all the time and effort you put into this.
Sure.
All right. So we talked a little bit about the common thread.
Sure. And I want to, well, if I can just mention one thing, I don't mean to interrupt, but I didn't talk much yet about, I mentioned it earlier, but with respect to the common thread, with all the reckoning and the cultural reckoning around racial injustices this year, a lot of conversation has been brought up around racial disparities in healthcare. And this is something actually we've known about for years as well. And we also, I think we haven't done nearly enough to address this. And an interesting study that came out, I think 2 or 3 years ago, I apologize, I don't have this study up. I don't have slides for everything I'm discussing today necessarily, but this is meant to be also conversation, and not only a presentation, but also conversation, is that one of the biggest disparities we see between, for example, African Americans and Caucasians, and blacks and whites, is with hypertension and heart disease. There was a study about 2 to 3 years ago which found that the number one factor that basically explains the disparity, or that is the explanation for the disparity. Number one, when I say number one, I mean it's not the only factor, but the most important, is actually nutrition. And there's many layers to that. I mean, but one of the layers to that is access to healthy foods in urban communities. Urban communities are often food deserts. And so there's so many aspects to this. It's not just being aware. It's not just understanding what to do as an individual, but there's so much we need to do collectively as a society to improve not only information, but improve access to healthy nutrition. And, we found in my medical center where I practice, and I'll explain more about this later, but we started a lifestyle medicine program, and we have many African Americans in the program who've done absolutely incredibly amazing, made so much progress, because food really it helps all races, of course, but I think in African Americans especially, there is a lot of that has to do with and there's studies on this. Again, this is not just my idea, but a lot of it has to do with what's called the Southern eating style, Southern diet style. Fried foods, processed foods, sweetened foods, organ meats, processed meats, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to bring that up because the topic of racial injustice and racial healthcare disparities has been brought to the forefront this year. Again, there's a common thread to that. And then also, right now in California, Lisa, our skies are disgusting. They're brown, they're gray, they're orange. We can't even go outside. I mean, we're not supposed to go outside to an extent because of COVID, but I don't even know that it's healthy to go outside. The air quality has been unhealthy on and off for weeks now. There's an odor to where I'm sure where you are too, Lisa. I mean, it's all over the state. The worst fires in history. It's in Oregon as well. So many states in the West Coast are affected by this. And it's clear that the science shows that this is due, the intensity of these fires, maybe not all the fact that these fires exist, but the intensity of them is due to climate change and the heat waves, the dryness to our brush, et cetera, and our trees, and a lot of the trees are dying. And we can no longer ignore that as well. This is a crisis. I mean, I don't know how much worse these fires can get. I don't want to have summers in California where we can't go outside and enjoy the beach, or we can't, what good is summer? What good is...
Well, it's all connected. And
it is.
And why people that are following a plant-based lifestyle or call themselves vegans, proud vegans, as I do, because food, the amount of methane and carbon dioxide that come from animal agriculture is overwhelming our atmosphere's ability to cope with these greenhouse gases.
Absolutely.
It's changing the weather. And if anybody doesn't believe it, just look at how the weather is so drastically different in this 10-year period than in a previous 10-year period.
Right.
And it's getting worse. We've never had temperatures in the San Fernando Valley and Woodland Hills of 120 degrees. That
Absolutely.
was what we saw in Death Valley, not 5 miles from where 10 miles from where you and I live.
Right.
So it is connected, and we need to stop.
Right. And it's affecting our health too. A lot of people might think, well, you're a doctor. What does this have to do with health? It affects our health. It's air quality. There's studies showing that pollution increases risk of heart attack and asthma attacks and everything. I mean, it is health too. And so absolutely.
And it's what we're doing to animals as well, because it's all connected. Right. Because it's connected to the health of our planet. And if anybody doesn't believe that, Mother Nature, whatever higher power you believe in, let's just look at the natural world. Mother Nature is angry, and she's showing us that she's saying, why don't you listen? You need to listen. We got COVID from wet markets. And there's so much that I'd like to say. I'm happy to mention social compassion legislation. I'm part of that team, and we lobby for better bills. And it's hard, even though we passed Senate Bill 1138, which is the plant-based options bill, requiring all acute care hospitals, nursing homes, and prisons to offer one plant-based meal option in each meal service. And even with that, we're having problems. People don't know about it. People don't talk about it. Right. So I think we're going to have to do some tweaking to that bill. But there are get involved. Get involved.
Absolutely. We all can do. There's so much we all can do.
Pick one thing and get involved.
Pick something, yes. And even if it's just working on your own health, that first of all, there's nothing more important than health. So you can always start there, and that's where I started for sure.
And people love when you're a role model. The best way to teach people is for people to look at you and go, "Oh my God, Steve, I haven't seen you since high school."
Right.
And you'll see some photos in a little while that I'll put up. But people are just, are going to be amazed. Is that really you? What a metamorphosis. All right, let's go on with prevention.
Sure. So 75% of chronic disease are preventable. We mentioned this. Food is the #1 cause of death, more than smoking. About 700,000 Americans every year die simply because of poor nutrition. I want to say poor, not malnutrition, but poor food choices. So if we can go to the next slide, Lisa.
Yes. Here we go. My favorite slide.
Okay. Yes, and why is this happening? This is why I think this is happening. Why is there a problem in this country? Is that people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and they're treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. There's incentives, there's financial incentives for the status quo, and the thing is that we, the people, have to be the change. And there's so much potential we can do together to change the food industry, because the food industry just wants to make us food that we buy. They just want to make money. So if we demand healthy food, they'll make us healthy food. And the healthcare system can change. There's many amazing like-minded colleagues colleagues of mine around the country, not only physicians, but dietitians, who are trying to change the system for the better. Lifestyle medicine is an official specialty in the United States. I'm actually hoping to become board certified in that this fall.
You will be.
We need to change the system, and we will. We are.
And I put your social media handles on there for your Facebook and your Instagram. And I think that what's really important is there are now so many physicians, and many younger physicians who grew up with social media are doing incredible posts. There's so much to learn from social media. Easier than reading an article. You can just flip through, your Instagram feed and learn a ton.
Absolutely. And if you're an individual, if you're a person watching this and you're wondering, okay, what can I do for my health today? How can I get started? If you could pull up my next slide, Lisa. I want to help you. If you're somebody who's looking, who really wants to improve your health right now, I want you to understand, first of all, why most of us are struggling in this country. This is why. Because the message that we've been given is wrong and it's harmful. We've been told that all along that we're the problem. What I mean by that is, how many of you have heard this before, that portion control and moderation are the keys to health? That is actually the wrong, believe it or not, as innocent and well-intentioned as that sounds, it's actually the wrong message. It's damaging to people. And why is that? I'll tell you why. Because portion control means counting, measuring, going hungry. It's not natural. Animals don't do that. People can do that for a short period of time. That's why people can lose weight in the short term, but they don't keep it. They don't maintain the weight loss. That's because portion control doesn't work. The other reason is because moderation doesn't work either. Those potato chips, we cannot eat just one. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't work. We need to understand that processed foods are addicting, and it's so much easier to not eat the potato chips and not have them in the house and not eat them at all than to eat just one. The other thing that we're told is that chronic diseases, go ahead, did we say something, Lisa?
I was going to say people can, it's not that potatoes are bad. Let's make the point.
Correct. It's not, it's processed foods.
Yeah, it's that
it's sugar, fat, and salt.
It's got a lot of salt in it, and it's been fried. So it has a disproportionate amount of fat, which you don't find in nature. But
absolutely,
eat the flavors you want, and put salsa on it, something that doesn't carry a fat content, and eat it. With the reason that we say you can eat as much as you want of whole food, plant-based cuisine is because of the fiber. The fiber
absolutely.
Will so you can't overeat. But when you're eating potatoes,
absolutely. In fact,
you can put down a whole bag.
Absolutely. We're thank you, Lisa. And in fact, that's even I think that might even be the next slide or two. But so the other thing that we're told is that chronic diseases are genetic or a result of aging. So we're basically told to accept these as normal, and it's just inevitable. And if you could advance to the next slide, Lisa, too, please. And we're also told that it's normal to take medications. The medications are advertised on TV. It's just normal part of our culture. And we're also told, you can go to the next slide too, that it's not only normal to take medications, but it's normal to need more and more medications because these diseases get worse over time. That we're not really given the message that there's hope that these diseases can get better over time. And today, Lisa, I know that many of your viewers may already know this, but perhaps some of you may not, is that these diseases indeed can get better over time. In fact, some of these diseases can even go away. So there is a message of hope today that we're bringing, Lisa, and that I'm bringing and we're bringing together. What if instead of portion control, there was a way where we could actually eat as much as we wanted? We could actually eat literally from a buffet. I mean, as much as we wanted, no portion control whatsoever, no moderation, and have benefits of weight loss. We can actually lose weight by eating more or eating until we're full. And what if our chronic diseases can be prevented or even reversed? What if we could get off medication by eating more food, by eating an unlimited amount of food? Well, guess what? We can live this way. And that's exactly what happens when we live a plant-based lifestyle, when we eat more whole plant foods, exactly as you said, Lisa. So how does this work? If you can go to the next slide, Lisa.
Come in,
please.
Okay, hang on one second. There we go. Hold on. Here we go.
Sure. So this comes from the amazing plant-based dietitian Juliana Hever. What this shows is that when you eat whole plant foods, you can actually eat more food for the same amount of calories. We can actually fill up with these foods and lose weight. So they'll fill up with less calories. How do you fill up with less calories? How is that possible? Well, it's very possible because whole plant foods are rich, as you mentioned, Lisa, thank you for mentioning it, in fiber and water both. And fiber and water both are bulky and heavy. So they're filling, they take space and fill us up in our stomach. But the best news about fiber and water is they both have 0 calories. So these whole plant foods, which are the only foods that are rich in fiber and water, are very filling, but with less calories. So that's the secret. It's not really a secret, but if you understand it, you can use that to your advantage, and you could dramatically lose weight, even if you don't exercise, Lisa. I mean, exercise is amazing for health, but for weight control, it's actually not that helpful for weight control. I mean, don't get me wrong, it helps to keep us healthy and maintain weight, but you really have to change your diet if you want to lose a significant amount of weight, and you can't just rely on exercise. If you can go to the next, go ahead, Lisa.
I'm saying what Juliana shows here, this is kind of small writing, but the stomach on the left, these are all 400 calories. The
Correct.
one on the left is 400 calories of oil. So it hardly even makes a dent, filling up the stomach, activating the stretch receptors and the pressure receptors that send a signal to your brain to let you know that you've eaten. The next middle one is 400 calories of beef. And you can see it doesn't even, it fills up maybe a fourth of the stomach. And there's no fiber in beef, and there's no phytonutrients or antioxidants. And the one on the right is 400 calories of vegetables. So you can see that's why you can literally, I hate to say overeat, but you can eat until you're actually full because they're all 400 calories. So, and that is going to activate the sensors to tell your brain you're full. And that's why we say when you're eating a whole food plant-based diet, you can really don't have to worry about portion control, because the fiber is going to tell your brain you're full and you're going to be done eating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you, Lisa. And this is another slide. I actually created this. So this concept of with plant-based nutrition, of the fiber and water helping you lose weight, we refer to this concept as calorie density. So in other words, these foods actually have less calories per pound, these whole plant foods. So less calories per pound of food. And this is a graph showing where, what the calorie density is for various types of foods. And what you can see is the lowest calorie density foods, the ones in green, are all whole plant foods: veggies, fruits, potatoes and starchy veggies, whole grains and beans, legumes, etc. These are the lowest calorie density foods. So these are essentially an all-you-can-eat buffet. And I call it the magical buffet because we're, in our culture, buffets are bad. Oh, don't go to a buffet. But you actually, there is such a thing as a magical plant-based buffet. And that's what I want you all. And I get excited sharing that because, I think it's exciting. It's liberating to know that we can be free of this portion control and moderation. We can eat freely. We can eat as much as we want and lose weight and prevent and reverse chronic disease.
What I like to tell my clients is the difference between caloric density and nutritional density. So when you're eating on the left hand of the scale, the caloric density in terms of the calories per pound are very low, but the nutritional density is very high in fiber, in antioxidants, in phytonutrients, in various vitamins, are much higher than if you looked at the right. At the right, you have high caloric density and very low nutritional density.
Correct.
So they actually are inversely proportional.
And actually, that's such a great point, because I think that actually segues us to the next slide that I have too. Because, it's not just about fiber and water. It's not that simple. I mean, I shouldn't say it's not that simple. It's just fiber and water help you lose weight in foods. But people always ask me, how do these foods reverse chronic disease? It's complex. That's a complex question to answer. But as you mentioned, Lisa, it's more than just fiber and water. There's nutrients in plant foods that we don't see in processed foods and in animal foods. And so this is an extensive list. We could probably spend a whole hour or two going through this whole list and what all the differences are. But suffice it to say that there are far more vitamins and antioxidants in whole plant foods. When we eat whole plant foods, our bodies have different substances that are released. For example, short chain fatty acids released in whole plant foods versus in animal foods. When we eat animal foods, our body increases levels of something called TMAO and IGF-1. These are all inflammatory or cancer promoting, chronic disease promoting in the sense of animal products, whereas whole plant foods tend to be obviously, anti-inflammatory, antioxidative, et cetera, et cetera. So there's many mechanisms to the disease processes where whole plant foods play a role in preventing and reversing, and it's complicated. But I want people to appreciate that there are significant differences in the makeup of these foods and how our bodies process them and how they affect our bodies. There's a whole lot of science to it. It's not just about fiber and water and calories, and it's not only about weight. You can be thin and still have a heart attack or get cancer. And I want people, there are a lot of thin people who think I could eat whatever I want. And I want that person to realize that's not always the case.
Well, something that's fairly new in plant-based medicine is understanding the gut microbiome. And there is an icon here. There's
right
on the left. And the short chain fatty acids are the components that actually feed the gut microbiome. Are you able to feed your gut microbiome with the animal foods on the right list?
Right. So what you're referring to, absolutely. So when you eat whole plant foods, the bacteria in your gut, the populations of them change to a much more favorable balance or population of bacteria, diversification of bacteria that are more beneficial for our health. And study after study is showing that. You're absolutely right. And there's so many layers to this, and that's why there's books and studies galore about all of this.
This is really why we want to do that. All right, let's go on to this one before we get on to.
Okay, so these are So I think many of you may already know this, but the benefits are weight loss of eating more plant foods, weight loss without portion control, prevention, reversal of diabetes, lowering of cholesterol, blood pressure, prevention, reversal of heart disease and erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction is really another manifestation of heart disease because it's all related to blockages in our arteries. Lower rates of some cancers, better GI or digestive function, less heartburn, less constipation, less fatty liver. And overall, this is one of my favorites and my patients' favorites, less need for medication. Many people, when they start eating more plants in their diet, the more the better. They need less medication. They can get off medication. In some cases, medications they've been on for 10, 20, 30 years, including even insulin of all things. People tend to live longer when they eat more whole plant foods. And they're, it's not just about, as I mentioned, it's not just about how many years in your life, it's about the life in your years. People have better quality of life, less pain, less inflammation, more energy, et cetera, et cetera. So tremendous benefits.
We have had a question that I wanted
to
put. I think it's interesting. This is a good one. Elaine Silver wants to know, what do you think of intermittent fasting?
Oh, sure. That's great. I think in general, that can be a very helpful tool, especially, this is how I look at it. I think if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet as best as you can, and you're exercising and you're getting good night's sleep and you're controlling your stress, you're doing everything you can to live a healthy lifestyle, but you're stuck with something. Maybe your weight is still stuck a little bit, or maybe you're still struggling with diabetes a little bit or something. Intermittent fasting can be that one extra step you take to get you over the hump. It really does work very well for many people across, for many things. There's a whole science to that as well. We can have probably a whole hour on intermittent fasting, and maybe you have had speakers on that. I don't recall. Maybe you might want to have that in the future, but I think it's an outstanding thing to do. And you don't really have to have a problem to do it. In other words, I think it's healthy probably for all of us to do it, but I don't necessarily know that you have to do it to be healthy. I don't think that that's the case. So absolutely a great thing to consider.
Okay. All right. Now.
So my story.
This is your story. So you are the skeptical yet worried, or you were the skeptical yet worried 38-year-old.
Right.
Years ago, was not that long ago.
It wasn't. It was about 7 years ago. When I first heard or learned about the science of plant-based nutrition and the benefits, very skeptical, because as a doctor, Lisa, and I think you know this well, but perhaps your viewers don't know this, we get very little education on nutrition, and the little that we do get, some of us get none, by the way, which is shocking, which is atrocious. But the very little that we do get, they don't teach us how we can prevent disease, reverse disease. It's minutia that we're taught. And so I was very skeptical, and I was 6'2", 255 pounds. I was obese. I had prediabetes, fatty liver, acid reflux, symptoms of sleep apnea. I had been yo-yo dieting, and I should mention this too. I forgot to mention this. I'll just tie this into my story too. What happens is when you tell people that portion control and moderation are the keys to health, what happens is that people will yo-yo. They will lose weight, they will gain it back. And then they'll keep trying over and over again, and they blame themselves. They think, well, I can't do this, so I must be a failure. And the more you feel like a failure, it starts to make you depressed. And so I really strongly believe that advice of portion control moderation is a significant contributor to people's depression. And that was, I think, for me, I was somewhat depressed, I think, especially about this, and also kind of burnt out as a physician too. But that's besides the point. And I was worried I could die suddenly, because in my family, there's significant heart disease in my family at young ages. I was worried that was going to happen to me. And so I learned about plant-based nutrition, and within 8 months, I had dramatic results. If you can pull up, as many people do. These are typical results. You can see before and after. I lost. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
This is pretty extraordinary. Look at that. This is the same person. I mean, people are going to go, oh, that must be your brother or your father or somebody else. No, that is you.
That's me. Yeah, I lost 75 pounds in 8 months. I've kept it off for 7 years. Pre-diabetes went away. Fatty liver, my blood work dramatically improved. And my symptoms of sleep apnea went away. If you can just kind of go through the slides, Lisa, please. Basically, everything went away. And it was so liberating for me, because for so many years in my life, I thought that there's something wrong in our family. Our genes are terrible. There's something wrong with me. I'm a failure. I mean, I was blaming everything but the information. I didn't know that the information that I had was wrong. And I didn't know that there is a much better way. And I think if we share and share this message as broadly as possible, it will give people so much hope and so much freedom. And I say freedom because I think a lot of people feel trapped by their genes and by, they just feel doomed that things are only going to continue to get worse. And that doesn't have to be the case. I've had tremendous success with many patients. We created a lifestyle medicine program, Lisa. I'm happy to share some stories. I know we're running low on time.
Yeah,
I'm happy to take questions, but
yeah, we got started a little bit late, so let's go ahead and do that. But I just think this is incredible. All of these, I wish people could see all of these manifestations of your chronic disease resolved. They went away. Are you taking any medication for your diabetes, for your pre-diabetes? It's resolved. You're not on medication anymore. You taking the blood pressure medication?
No. In fact, I didn't, to be honest with you, I was fortunate. I didn't have technically high blood pressure, but it runs in my family. But my blood pressure nonetheless dropped 20 points. So I was at maybe about 115, 120, and now I'm about 95, 100.
So this is the time.
Amazing.
Well, this is the time I like to remind people when they do adopt a whole food plant-based diet, it's very important if they are on blood pressure medication to measure their blood pressure and to note if their blood pressure is decreasing, because they may need to speak to their doctor about having their blood pressure medicine lowered.
Absolutely.
So we're not telling anybody to lower their medication, but you need to go to your primary care physician and have that person, your nurse practitioner or physician's assistant or primary care physician to do that, because
absolutely.
I see it all the time.
It works so quickly, Lisa, within days.
Dropping, cholesterol dropping, diabetes medication. So those two are really important, because if you drop your blood sugar and your blood pressure significantly, you could pass out. You could
absolutely.
So it's important. And the idea is, someone may say, well, I don't want to do this. Well, it's actually a good thing, because then you wind up getting off of your medication.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, there were a couple other topics you wanted to cover.
Well, I was gonna share a few stories of patient stories real quick, if that's okay, because I want people to understand that these stories I'm going to share with you, as dramatic as they might seem, they're fairly typical. I'm not kidding. I really am not kidding. And because I've seen many of these stories happen over and over and over again. But I want people to know what's possible. I want people to know that there's hope. So if it's okay, I'll share some stories. These come from patients who have been through our programs that we've started. So there was first patient I'll mention is Janet. And Janet she's in her mid-70s, obese with COPD, which is basically from smoking, emphysema. She was on oxygen, and she could barely breathe and she could barely walk. Lisa, she actually used a walker, and she, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned, she was on oxygen, and she felt didn't have much good quality of life, and she felt basically hopeless because she'd been struggling with weight for many years, didn't think she could have weight loss surgery, didn't really want it, high risk, etc. She eats from the magical buffet as much as she wanted. She really did, and she loved it. She loved eating this food. She loved eating freely as much as she wanted. And within about a year or so, she lost over 80 pounds. She lost the need for her oxygen, Lisa. She could breathe so much better. She no longer needed her oxygen. And she could walk so much better. She no longer needed her walker.
Wow.
So she was someone who looked like, oh my gosh, she's in such bad shape. She could barely do anything. And now she's literally, I'm not kidding, literally walking everywhere. She says that she feels 25 years younger. Just imagine that. Yeah. I mean, no pill can do that. No, and surgery, don't get me wrong, I'm not against weight loss surgery. For many people that works, but this is so much safer if you can choose this option. So that's one story. Another story I'll share is Ignacio's story. Ignacio, I believe he's in his mid-50s or so. Ignacio was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and his hemoglobin A1C was 12.4. Now, 12.4 roughly corresponds to a sugar level of about 300 or more, give or take, ballpark. Immediately, he was put on insulin and metformin. Immediately, and he was told that by his primary doctor, Ignacio, you're going to need these medications for the rest of your life. And that's, he kind of came to accept that. It's depressing, but that's what we've come to in this country is we accept these things, whether we like to or not. Well, it turns out that somebody sent him to our program, and he was interested and open-minded, thank goodness. And I kid you not, Lisa, I kid you not, Within 6 months, his A1C,
Wow.
first of all, he was able to get off the insulin and the metformin within 6 months. Well, actually, he got off it within 2 months. But the reason I bring up 6 months is we repeated his A1C. And off the insulin and metformin, his A1C was 5.1. 5.1 is no longer, not only is it no longer diabetes, it's not even pre-diabetes. It's completely normal. It is amazing. He literally cured himself of diabetes, reversed it 100% in just a few months. So here's someone who was going to have essentially a life sentence of insulin and medication, perhaps chronic disease, and it's gone within months, gone. And now the earlier you treat the diabetes with lifestyle, the better, but it is reversible. It is curable. And
in the case of diabetes, please let the audience know, what are the most common complications of patients who have diabetes? What
gosh.
are their heart disease risk?
Yes, it doubles or triples the risk of so many things: heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, dialysis, blindness, amputation, head to toe, this disease kills and disables and makes people depressed, head to toe. And he doesn't have it anymore. And the other thing is he not only he wrote to us and said that, you know, not only is he happy that he's off his medication, but he has more energy, he feels great. He feels younger as well. Many people who go through this change feel younger, more energetic. He says his teenage boys can't keep up with him. I mean, this is amazing. I'm going to share, if it's okay.
Yeah, I want to ask one more thing.
Sure.
Is there a publication that you refer, now when people go to the Kaiser program, they're Kaiser members, but
Yes.
What publications do you like to refer people to that they can get at the order from Amazon or in the bookstore?
Oh, you mean which books?
Yeah, which books do you recommend?
Oh God, you know, I love this question. I love this question. I also dread it because there's so many, and I think a lot of times, just like doctors, you know, there's certain doctors that fit your certain people's personalities. There's certain books I think that so, you know, what got me started was Dr. Furman's book, Eat to Live. But I've also read Dr. McDougall's books. I've also read Dr. Barnard's books. I've also read Dr. Greger's books. Honestly, I really do love them all. And Brenda Davis's books and Juliana Hever's, but it's so hard for me to pick a favorite. A lot of times what I'll do is I will try to get a sense from my patient what their personality is like and how much information they like, how much detail they like. Because How Not to Die is an amazing book, but it's really thick and it's very scientific. Not necessarily the best book for everyone.
What about Forks Over Knives?
Forks Over Knives movie, The Game Changers, What the Health. These are all excellent documentaries.
Forks Over Knives is a website. And
absolutely. The website is
the website. So you can get a lot of free information. Just go to forksoverknives.com. You can also go to physicianscommittee.org, and there's a lot of free information there. I teach the 21-day vegan kickstart for Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. I do that every year in January, and we had 750,000 people sign up.
Wow.
It's just awesome. Extraordinary that we did that on the News Network. Yeah, PCR was very happy with me because we got a lot of new signups. But there is an app called 21-Day Vegan Kickstart. It's 100% free. It's not like, okay, now you've got the app. Well, for another $20 a month, you can get the full access. There is no full access. You get the full access when you download it for free for either for Android or for iPhone, and they keep updating it when you get recipes and videos and grocery lists. So I like to tell people to start there because it's free.
Absolutely.
And so much great information. So I'm not just trying to plug CRM. I mean, I think it's a phenomenal way of getting information. And then certainly social media. There's so many great people. I have Dr. Melissa Mondala, a family practice doctor at the Institute of Plant-Based Medicine, is going to be my guest next week. And she's absolutely, I hate to say this, but she's absolutely adorable. I mean,
she's great.
She's a wonderful doctor, but she makes it fun, and she makes it cool, and she makes it fresh. And it's like, wow, I want to be like that.
Well, you're absolutely, and you know what? It needs to be cool, and it is cool. Honestly, what's cooler than being healthy, and what's cooler than eating colorful, delicious food, eating as much as you want? I mean, eating is cool again.
All right, close us out with one more story.
Okay, well, here one more story. I'll share this one. There's a patient named Jerry, and Jerry has type 1 diabetes, or well, yeah, he still has it. That you can't always cure yourself of type 1 because that's a little tougher. Your body doesn't make insulin. But the story with Jerry is that he was getting pretty severe chest pain, and it got so bad that he could not walk across a parking lot, Lisa, without having to stop. So every single day, he couldn't mow his lawn. He loved mowing his lawn. It affected his quality of life severely. And he was told that he had 2 major blockages in big arteries of his heart. And that if diet and exercise and medication didn't work, that he was going to need bypass surgery. And bypass surgery, as you know, Lisa, and as many of your viewers know, it's major surgery. They literally fracture your breastbone. They spread apart your ribs. They take your heart, disconnect your heart from your body's own circulation, connect it to a machine. They slice open your leg. I mean, and they take a section of your vein and they sew it onto your heart. I mean, this is major, major surgery with very high risk. I mean, there's a 1% to 2% risk of just mortality. There's risk of stroke and all kinds of risk involved, major surgery. He came to our program, and I kid you not, Lisa, he started eating, whole plant foods, whole plant-based diet, whole food plant-based diet. Within just a couple weeks, the chest pain started to melt away. By 2 months, it was completely gone, completely gone. He didn't have to worry anymore about bypass surgery. He didn't have to take medication they gave him medication for angina, which is chest pain medication. Mm-hmm. He had side effects from it, but he doesn't even have to take that anymore. It just completely disappeared. So that's how powerful this can be. I mean, there's other stories that show the power of this, but I want people to know that the benefits don't take months or years to show up. They show up within days to weeks. And so you can get better, you can get well right now. And why not? Why wait? I want to kind of, one of the things I always like to end with is I want to inspire people to not wait. Because honestly, when it comes to heart disease, when it comes to even amputations, you might think an amputation doesn't happen overnight. But you know what? Once you get a wound in your foot, if you have diabetes, that can quickly progress to gangrene. That actually happened to my father. That's a whole nother story. But the point is that don't wait. Heart attacks, 2/3 of heart attacks, Lisa, occur without warning. There's no warning. So don't wait. And up to a third of the time, people die of heart attacks. And if you don't die of a heart attack, chances are you've got significant heart damage for life that you cannot reverse. Once there's damage, you can't, maybe a little bit, maybe it can be reversed, but scar is a scar. So don't wait. Act now. Not only you need this, we all need it, but as a society, again, going back to the theme, we need this now more than ever. There are crises. It's not just health. It's the cost, it's finances, it's depression, it's pandemics, it's global warming, it's everything. So thank you again, Lisa. Yes.
It's our social community. We have to work together. We have to help each other, and
Absolutely.
we have to try to protect the planet. And Absolutely. It may make me sound like a hippie vegan, but it's true. The science speaks for itself.
It's fun. You're absolutely right. And it's funny you mentioned hippie vegan. A lot of people accuse people those of us who are plant-based as being hippies or fanatics, but this is about survival. This is about survival of not just our own species, but about, again, I've mentioned the problems over and over again that we're dealing with, but this is the best answer. And, you don't have to be, and I know you and I, Lisa, would love if everybody became healthy vegan. And by the way, I should also mention, it's very important for everybody to know that, and I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it's not just about eating vegan foods. It's about eating whole, unprocessed plant foods, because processed foods can be just as damaging to the body as many animal foods. In some cases, even worse, depending on the foods in question. It's a very important message. But I also want to say that if you're someone who's listening who thinks, oh, I can't be vegan, so many of my patients say I can't be vegan. I don't want to dismiss those people, because I always feel like progress is progress. I don't want people to think this has to be all or none. Obviously, you and I, Lisa, would love it if everyone became healthy vegans. But the reality is, I don't know if we can expect the entire planet to be healthy vegan. But the more you go in this direction, the better. Just see this as as a moving needle and just move it as far as you can. And it gets easier and easier the more you move it. I think small changes, Lisa, people don't, small changes may seem easy at first, but the thing is you don't always see the results. And if you're only making, you don't usually see results with small changes. And when we see big results, we're more encouraged, more motivated to continue. But the other thing is that when we make small changes, that might mean that we're still eating a lot of these processed foods and addictive foods, and it's much harder, I think, to sustain that. I think big changes are actually easier to sustain, Lisa, than small changes, because of the results and because it's easier to not eat certain things than to moderate them.
We're creatures who enjoy pleasure, and when we feel better, then that tends to be the thing that drives at least my clients to continue, because I can't, why didn't you tell me how good I was going to feel? It's like, I tried to tell you, they weren't processing it. But once they actually feel better, they wake up in the morning, it's like, I actually want to go running. I want to get outside.
Right.
I want to, they come home from work. It's like, I don't want to just veg out on the couch and watch TV. It's like, you want to go do something?
Right.
And that's what people say. They get this energy. They don't believe it until they experience it. So that's why we think that a 21-day program is a perfect length of time to really figure out if this is going to work for you. And I will tell you, you follow it, it's going to work for you.
Absolutely. And this is not, as you mentioned, Lisa, this is not a lifestyle of deprivation. There's so much variety of plant-based foods you can eat that the possibilities are infinite. And at the same time, when you start to experience these health benefits and you're feeling better, that's priceless. Yeah. That is priceless. And that really should be why we're doing this. We're not doing this to deprive ourselves. We're doing this to actually regain our health and our lives and take our lives back.
I think that's a great note to end on. Dr. Steve Lawenda, Kaiser Permanente, Southern California. You're in Antelope Valley at the Antelope Valley Medical Center. You are leading the way in helping to teach many other Kaiser doctors about the benefits of this type of lifestyle. As with in any organization, not everybody turns on the same dime, and it's kind of like turning a ship. And if we stick with it, the ship is going to turn, because the outcome is better patient care. And that's the bottom line. That is certainly what Kaiser prides itself on, is all of the education and preventive medicine. So you're doing, just keep up the good work. I can't wait to have you back. Maybe we'll have you back in a couple months, and we'll have some other things to talk about, because there's clearly so much to talk about. And I can see from the comments that we're getting that our audience was very happy with this show today. So thank you so much for being here. I'm Lisa Karlan, your host of Hey Doc, What's New in Plant-Based Medicine. I'll be back on Friday, and we've got some really great shows coming up. By the way, I got Eric Adams. He's going to be on October 23rd. Awesome. How cool is that? You made a great social media post about him, the borough president of Brooklyn, who's going to run for mayor of New York.
Awesome.
So we've got some great shows coming up. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. And
bye, everybody.
Bye.